Welcome back to Too Young to Grieve, and this is episode number 7. So, before we dive in, as always, I just want to say and show my appreciation for everybody who supports the podcast, who likes, comments, shares, messages me personally, messages the Too Young to Grieve account. And it was only till recently that I realized how much people do resonate with this, even having someone and a few of you asking, when's the next episode coming? Again, apologies for the delay on the last one with the editing and all that side of things, just took a lot longer. But now we're back in the little lab recording the podcast as per normal. And I always like to think, like, how long is it before that t-shirt falls down? Because it always seems to happen, but fingers crossed it stays up today. But anyway, a lot of you tune in, as I've realised, just to hear and resonate with the process of grief and the journey of grief. So enough of my waffle. Let's dive into today's topic, which I want to cover something and talk about something that comes up a lot after loss. It's come up a lot in my life before loss and after loss, but I feel like a lot of people do experience it, in particular after trauma and after loss, but don't always sort of connect the dots and understand what it is. And the topic that we're going to dive into today is anxiety, and anxiety in particular after loss, because for so many of us, anxiety doesn't sort of just start randomly. And it starts a lot of the time after grief. Unfortunately, it's just something that happens. The psychology behind it we'll dive into as well, dive into my experiences with it, and stuff that a lot of us, I feel, will be able to relate to in regards to anxiety, in particular after grief. Because when you lose someone that you love, I've said it before, your whole world changes overnight. And it does, unfortunately. And your body doesn't forget that kind of shock. It doesn't. As we've said before, grief hits you mentally, of course, but it also impacts you physically. And it's like your brain suddenly realizes that bad things can happen, as you say, like they can happen overnight and your whole world can change. And it never sort of quite relaxes again. And that is your body, as I've said before, going into that fight or flight mode and that constant stressed out state a lot of the time. And for me, anxiety started before grief, but again, like I say, it came back around a lot more and in different types of ways that I'd never experienced before after grief. So to start off with talking about my experience with it, and if some of you resonate with this, then again, that's another reason why I talk about these things and open up about these things. So for me, my sort of first real experience with anxiety after grief wasn't too long after my dad passed away. And it came in the form of something that I'd never experienced before. And what that was panic attacks. And I haven't really ever told anyone about this before. But I feel like it's the right time. I feel like people who potentially are experiencing these as well will find some peace in it and understand that it can happen. So my first sort of panic attack, I remember it clear as day. I can even see the room right now. I can see it like the whole episode happening. I was in my room. It was late at night. I don't think I was revising, but I was just stood in my room. Everything completely normal, just thinking about things a little bit. And suddenly my heart started racing out of nowhere. I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know whether I was having a heart attack. I didn't know whether what. I had no idea. I'd never experienced this feeling before. And my chest just got really tight, like really tight. My hands were shaking, my body was shaking, and I couldn't breathe properly. And I didn't know what was going on. I had the room at the top of the house at uni, so all my mates were downstairs, other side of the house. I didn't know what to do, and no one was sort of around at the time. So again, I just sort of had to deal with it myself. I didn't really know what to say. I didn't really want anyone to see me or tell me what to do at that time either. So I just remember being there thinking, like, am I dying? Is this like, is this really happening? And I was just thinking, like, what is actually going on here? And I didn't know what to do. I was just trying to, like, get my breath back, trying to just get under control, basically. It just sort of passed. After a couple of minutes, it just passed. I still to this day didn't really know what actually happened and what was going on with that first panic attack. It was just something that was just like, wow. And it sort of came, I remember thinking about my health a lot more at that time. Obviously, my dad passing away from a disease, like, I just thought, potentially I might have like any little weird feeling in my stomach or anything like that. I used to think, what is that? Should I go get that checked? It could have been because I've had yogurt at night and literally like my stomach was just rumbling. I'll be like, oh, that could be something. It's the anxiety you get after grief. It comes, it can happen. You just feel a lot more alert. Your body's more alert to things. And I didn't tell anyone about it. I didn't want to, like I said. I didn't speak to any doctors. I didn't, go to therapy or nothing like that, which I never regret anything in my life, but I definitely think I should have been looking into therapy at the time. I feel like I was studying psychology and I thought, you know what, I'll just crack on with that and I'll learn some things here and there. But I highly recommend therapy to anybody who's going through grief, in the early stage of grief, who's young and sort of thinks it's a load of nonsense. I promise you it's not, and it will definitely help if you've never tried it before. But that's on the therapy side of things. But to me, it sort of felt like my body was just going against me, betraying me. Like, I've never had these feelings before. Why was it happening now? And what scared me most with this anyway wasn't just the panic attack itself. It was the fear of it happening again. And that's where anxiety sort of came a lot stronger for me after that experience. And after that night, I lived in a sort of fear for a little while of when was the next one going to happen. I'd avoid going out for a little bit. I'd make excuses not to see people, new people. I'd constantly check how I was feeling. Like I said, if I felt anything dodgy, I would be like, oh, I should really get that checked out, or that could be something really dangerous. And it was like my brain was constantly scanning for danger, even if nothing was really wrong. And that's what anxiety does, especially after grief. It steals your sense of safety because you constantly think, could something happen to me now? Or, is something going to happen to someone else? And then I'm living in that fear of, okay, so I'm going to lose someone else now, or I'm going to lose myself. So you're constantly in that sort of state of anxiety and just thinking, like, what's the next thing that's going to go wrong then? And there is, why I do this podcast is to go back to my psychology background and roots and back this up with research so you actually understand what's going on. And I wish I had that understanding when I was experiencing these things, because if you understand that there is research behind it, there is reasoning why this is happening, you can sort of accept it and understand it a lot better, and that will help you through your journey. So, like I say, there is research that backs this up. Studies show that bereavement, so losing people, grieving people, significantly, increases the risk of developing anxiety disorders. And one study even found that early anxiety symptoms after loss can even lead to more complicated grief and depression later on. And when you think about it, it makes total sense. When someone that you love so deeply dies, your body experiences trauma. Your nervous system goes into that survival mode, which is why a lot of people, when they're talking about grief, they tell you to, work on your nervous system, controlling your nervous system, resetting it, getting it back to normal, because your nervous system does go into that survival mode, and it does. And when that survival system never fully resets, you end up sort of living in that constant state of what if, what's going to happen next? What if this happens to this person? What if this happens to me? And that's what was basically happening to me when I had that panic attack, that first one. And for a lot of us, grief does make us hyper aware. It definitely made me hyper aware. Overthinking small things, people not replying, for example, minor little pains, like I said, being away from home, like all these little things, you start overthinking them a lot more than you probably would do before grief. And my brain had sort of learned that safety could be taken away without a warning. And that's what happens to a lot of us. Because someone we love just goes a lot of the time, that safety gets taken away, like we discussed in a previous episode. The safety aspect of it creates that anxiety as well. And like I say, I like to back these things up with research and what the psychology behind it is. And psychologists call this the terror management theory. And basically what it says is essentially when we're reminded of death, even subconsciously, our brain works in mysterious ways, as we all know. Our brain goes into overdrive, basically trying to find control and meaning for absolutely everything that we're doing. And that's why after loss, you might overwork. I certainly did. Overthink or try to plan everything to a T. And if it doesn't go to plan, then, that anxiety comes up and you're like, what is going on? Why is it not going to plan? This could do this. And you just start overthinking absolutely everything because you're subconsciously trying to create certainty for yourself after something that feels really unpredictable has happened. So you're trying to create that certainty in a world that suddenly just feels unpredictable. And that's not irrational at all. It's human. It's a human response to grief and losing someone. And you've been through something. Everyone that is listening to this that has lost someone or lost something, you've been through something that has basically shattered your sense of control over things in the world. So your anxiety is your brain's way of saying, please don't let that happen again. So like I said before, when you really think about it, it's kind of understandable that you do get a little bit of anxiety after grief. And it can go away for some people after a year or two or sooner. And for some people, it might linger around and might impact their day-to-day a little bit more. So how does it sort of show up in your day-to-day life? How can it look? Well, anxiety after grief doesn't always look like panic attacks. Let me set that straight. That happened to me. And it doesn't mean that you're going to experience panic attacks just because you've lost someone. Sometimes it can be physical, the chest tightness, the dizziness, the constant tension that someone who's going through grief can't really explain to someone who's never been through it or not going through it and doesn't understand it. And one of the charities, actually, Mary Curie, actually lists physical symptoms. So breathlessness, for example, fatigue, a racing heart. All these things are really common in grief. And it's because, like I say, your nervous system is still wired to that danger, to constantly be on edge of something else happening. And sometimes it can be mental. It can be overthinking, fear of more bad news, replaying conversations over in your head. Should I have said this differently? Did they say that? What does that mean? Catastrophize. I can't even say it. Catastrophizing, sorry. Tiny little things. That's something that I certainly did that in grief. And a lot of us will do. We'll think that the worst is going to happen with something for no reason, really. The only reason being that we're going through grief. And then the last one is that sometimes it's emotional. And, that guilt for moving on. Or I was even watching a film the other day and it had a little bit of grief in it. And the girl said, it doesn't feel right to laugh right now or smile right now because someone she loved just passed away. And you might feel that. You might feel that guilt for laughing or moving on or, not thinking about them every second of every day after the first couple of weeks of maybe doing that. Again, another emotional thing is the fear of losing someone else. I certainly had that. In my final year of uni, my anxiety was through the roof because of that. That feeling that someone else could go or I could go, that's something that really plays on your mind. And I think for some of us genuinely do have a fear of ever feeling happy again. And it's scary to say, but for some people that is a constant thought that, now this person has gone or this something has gone, will I ever feel happy again? Will I ever feel like I did when they were around? And from my own perspective, you will. 100% you will. You learn to carry grief. It doesn't ever fully go away, but you learn to carry it. And you can definitely find happiness after someone you love has been taken away. So if you're at the early stage of grief and you do feel that way, that I'll never feel happy again, I promise you, you will. It'll feel different, but you will find happiness in things. You'll find happiness in carrying their legacy on, in doing things to make them proud, in doing things to make other people around you proud going through grief. You're going to find happiness again. It just might show up differently. So for me, anxiety showed up a lot in the quiet moments when I wasn't keeping busy, when no one was around. I'd wake up feeling uneasy, like something was wrong. Even when everything was fine, I'd constantly be in that state of fight or flight, thinking something could go wrong. And that's what the long-term grief anxiety is kind of like. Your body's in a future that hasn't even happened yet. And that's what anxiety basically is, isn't it? You're thinking about future things that haven't even happened yet, and you're thinking about the worst of those things. And that's what a lot of the time anxiety shows up as. You constantly thinking about your future, what's going to happen, when you're not really living in the moment and just thinking about what I can do today to make tomorrow better. Or what can I do today to be better than who I was yesterday. And that long-term grief anxiety, it doesn't just stay in the grief part of your life sometimes. It can start if you don't nip it in the bud and, do things like therapy, journal, and actually accept the grief and understand it. It can start leaking into things like work, like relationships, even your confidence. And you start living a bit small sometimes, some of us, saying no to things, like I'm not going to go on this trip, for example, because I don't know what's going to happen and I can't face that. You play it safe, you just get into a job just for the sake of it because that's the safe thing to do, or you start second guessing yourself. Am I even doing the right things? Is this the right path? Like, I still think that sometimes. I still think, am I on the right path? Am I doing the right things? And that's just part of this anxiety that comes after grief, because you sort of think, am I actually doing the right things, or should I just be playing it safe? Should I just be, living small, just live a, content life? I know it's short, so why don't I just live that and just crack on? Because deep down, you don't want to lose control again. That's all it is. You've had that experience of, okay, my life's out of control after losing this person, and you don't want it to happen again. And that's what keeps you living in that type of way. But you can easily, I say this to absolutely anyone and everyone, there's so much that you are capable of and you can do that you shouldn't let that person being taken away from you keep you to just living a life that you potentially don't want to live. Now, I'm not saying that someone isn't happy just living a content, normal life, just cracking on. That's absolutely fine. But for some other people, they, want to chase something that people might think is crazy. And you can do that. If that's what you want to do, you can do that. Don't let grief stop you from doing that. That's what I'll say on that. Now, some more psychology behind it all, it helps me understand it. That's why I like talking about psychology, talking about how the mind actually does work and the research behind it, because it helps you understand it better. And there's a model, and it's called the dual process model of coping. And it basically says after loss, we swing between two states, basically. The loss-oriented side, where we feel the pain, the sadness, the memories, hearing the songs that remind you of them, all that stuff. And then there's the restoration-oriented side, where we focus on rebuilding our life, new routines, moving forward, getting on with life, shall we say. And the issue is when we're not taught how to process grief properly, which is what a lot of the reason why I've started this podcast, because a lot of young people going through grief don't get that support. They don't understand how to process it, and it comes back to haunt them because they haven't actually processed the grief and they're just almost running from it or doing things to keep busy, as people would say, just keep busy. But if you're not actually processing it, then how can you ever get over it and learn to live again? So that's something that really needs to change. And that's why I've started this podcast, so you do understand a little bit more about how you can process it and deal with it. And if we're not taught how to process it, we often suppress it, like I said. We suppress that loss side and we just rush into that restoration side to try and get back to work, to get back to training, to get back to normal life. When I always like to say that you're not going to go back to your normal life because something has changed, something drastic has changed, but you'll go back to your new life after grief. And if you rush into that restoration, the pain doesn't disappear. It just gets trapped and locked up inside your body and it's just shut away. And that's what a lot of people do. And especially in the past, where we didn't understand the brain as much, people would start to get, mental disorders or things that will impact their life because they haven't processed the trauma from their past. And that is why I'm such a big fan of therapy, because it allows you to understand yourself. And when you understand yourself, you can understand others better and support others better. So that's that grief or that trauma that's trapped in your body that hasn't been addressed, and you've rushed back into restoration without even processing the loss. That's where that anxiety comes from, and that anxiety lives. Your mind's trying to move on, your body's trying to move on, but it can't because your body's stuck in that survival mode. So you start feeling that constant unease, like you're 2 steps ahead of your emotions, like you haven't actually even sorted out what's going on inside. And that's why I always say that anxiety after grief isn't a mental weakness. It's basically your body reminding you that something deep inside and still inside your body, it needs attention, but you're ignoring it. So don't try not to ignore it. Try to, as hard as it is, when you are ready, and you don't have to do it straight away, you don't have to do it after a week or 2 weeks. Take as much time as you need. Like I say, grief has no timeline. But when you are ready to address it, do it. Don't just ignore it, because then it comes back in different ways. It might affect your relationship, it might affect your career, it might affect just you in general, living your life. So do address it and give it the attention that it does deserve. That's what I will say. So what actually does help with the anxiety? I'm not going to pretend that there's one fix. Everybody is different. As I always say, everybody's different how they process things. But I'll share what helped me and what a lot of the research supports too. So the first thing that I like to say, and it sort of relates back to what we were just discussing, and that's awareness. As simple as it sounds, it's just understanding why you feel like this makes a massive difference. So why does it actually? Why has this grief, why has this trauma impacted you so much? Why is it making such a difference to your life? Why can't you ever be happy again? Understanding that and being aware of that, when you stop seeing anxiety as random, it loses power, because you understand why you're feeling that anxiety. And when you understand that and you're aware of that, it doesn't really impact you as much. And it certainly did for me. When I was aware of it, it lost that power that it had to make me have those panic attacks. Once I became aware of it, my panic attacks quickly slowed down and stopped eventually. The second thing that I'm so big on is movement. There is nothing that movement, there's no time that when you move your body, you don't feel good. Apart from running a marathon. If you run a marathon, there are points where you don't feel great. But movement is something that is so powerful, and a lot of the time it's free. Yes, if you have to go to the gym, sometimes you have to pay a gym. Well, all the time you have to pay a gym membership, but things like walking, things like jogging, running, going and doing some bodyweight exercises in the park, using the free park equipment, going and grabbing a football and playing with your mates. All of these things are so, so good. Exercise, walks, whatever it is, anything that releases that built up adrenaline and tension and brings your body back to safety because those feel-good hormones are being released, it's absolutely brilliant for you. So get moving where you can, as often as you can, even if it's just a walk a day. Promise you it will help. The third thing is something that a lot of people sort of ignore and think is nonsense, but it's breathing properly. Anxiety shortens your breath. That's what it does. So slow down, deep breaths. Even if you go on Spotify or YouTube and you do a breathing technique, doing these things, deep breaths, resets your vagus nerve. And that calms your nervous system and your system back down. So when people say, reset your nervous system, do this, do that, it's just simple things. You don't have to go and buy a crazy supplement or do something out of the ordinary. You're just breathing properly, doing things like that. It's science. And it's not just that mindfulness nonsense. It's literally science, and it will help you out massively. So give it a go if you haven't. And if it's something that, like I say, everyone is different in how they process this. So if you do feel like it's not doing much for you, then okay, or you can't stick it out, then okay, try something different. But doing something is better than doing nothing. The fourth one, and to be honest, probably one of the most important, if not the most important, is talking. Even myself just talking on this podcast to you guys, it helps me out massively. Talking to other people helps massively. One of the big UK charities, Mind, says that anxiety after grief is common, but silence makes it worse. So you might hear people say, just talk to someone. Talk to anyone who you feel comfortable talking to. It's better to speak up. And a lot of people say it, but a lot of people ignore it. And just telling someone, I've been feeling a bit anxious lately. Even that, just saying that is a form of release. You've got that feeling off your chest, off your body, like discussed. And they might not have the exact answer, but just saying it and speaking to them will do something for you. Just doing that. And then of course, having that someone who's always there to check in on you once you've told them and figuring out everything with you is going to help you massively. So talk, speak up. It's not weak to do that. I'm going to say this specifically to men, but of course there are women as well who don't speak up, and I advise you to. But it's a lot more common in men to not speak up because you're seen as weak. You're seen as a weak man for not, for showing emotion or for saying that, I'm struggling a bit. It's seen as weak for some reason. But man to man, it's not. It's better for you to speak up than us have to lose you because you haven't spoke up. So remember that. And the final one is the reassurance. And it's not from others, but from yourself. The reassurance that everything is going to be okay. Because it is. You're going to be okay. No matter how deep into this anxiety, into this grief that you are, thinking that you're never going to get better, there's no way out. Having that reassurance from yourself that there is, and it can only get better. And that you are going to be okay. No matter what happens, you will be okay. Have that reassurance that that is the case, because it is. You will be okay. And every time that you remind your body that you're safe, that things are going to be all right. Every time you face a trigger and survive it, remember, you rewire your brain. Your brain right now is in that fight or flight. It's in that survival mode. But every time you do something for yourself and tell it that it's safe, it rewires. Your brain literally can rewire itself. So you're not doomed. You're not, like if you're feeling a certain way, it doesn't mean that you're going to stay that way. You can literally change your brain's pathways. That's science. And that's healing. So I hope that if you are listening right now and you've been dealing with some form of anxiety, whether it's panic attacks, whether it's just a little few overthinking here and there, it will show up in different ways for you. As I say, everyone is different. But if you are facing that anxiety after losing someone, if you're in your early stages of your grief journey, I want you to know this. You're not losing your mind. You're just reacting to something that your body wasn't built to handle easily. I can't tell you how difficult the pain of losing someone is and how difficult navigating grief is. That the fact that you wake up every single day and keep showing up is a credit to yourself. The fact that you are still here showing up every single day for yourself and for others around you, you should be proud of that. And if you do feel a little bit of anxiety here and there, you're not losing your mind, like I say. You're just reacting and working something out that is very difficult to navigate. So, anxiety after grief is basically your body's way of protecting you. Let's put it that way. It just doesn't realise that you've survived already. And that's why you get those feelings of anxiety. And you don't have to fight it. Like I say, you just have to be aware of it and understand it. Make peace with it. And remind yourself that you're safe again. So that's all what I've discussed before. That awareness, that reassurance. That, you know what? Just say to yourself, you know what, mate? You've already survived one of the worst days of your life. So you can survive this little bit of anxiety that you're feeling right now. You can survive going into work. You can survive posting that thing you want to post on social media. You can survive going and playing football in front of a crowd. You can survive starting your own business. That relationship, that friendship, that comment someone said. It's nothing, it's minor, I've lost someone really close to me. So this little bit of anxiety that I'm feeling about this little minor thing, you know what? I can survive this too. Remind yourself of that, because you can. And like I say, keep going, keep showing up, because you're going to be okay. And that's what you need to remember. So to sum it up, you might have some uneasy feelings, some anxious feelings after grief. And like I say, that is completely normal. A lot of us do. You're not weird for feeling that anxiety, but feel it, understand it, and when you do, you'll be able to get back to that easier life and more fulfilled life as a result. So I'm going to leave it there. If this episode has helped you, which I hope it has, please share it with someone who might need it. That's what this podcast is about. Making people aware that navigating grief is not easy, but there are people going through it just like you, trying to build a community here of people who are going through it and can support each other through it or can understand it better, because that's what I wish I had when I was younger and going through it. Anxiety after grief is something so many people live with in silence even, not science. But the more we talk about it, the more normal that it becomes. So let's start talking about it more. Let's start sharing how we feel. Let's start speaking to people that can help us and can listen to us. And they don't need to know the science, the psychology behind these things. All they need to do is just sit there and listen to you talk. And if you do talk, they will listen. So speak to people that you feel comfortable speaking to. And that's how I'm going to leave it. So thank you so much for listening. I hope it has helped. Please, like I say, share with anyone who needs it. What I do want everyone who feels comfortable to do is either drop me a message, drop the page a message, or comment below the podcast. If there is something that you really do want covered on this podcast, or you do find difficult navigating, then feel free to comment it below, drop me a message, drop the page a message, because I have so many ideas and topics that I can cover. But if there's something that you want covered specifically for yourself, then I'll cover it, or I'll even get a guest on who might know even more about it. So I'll leave it there. Follow Too Young to Grieve on Instagram. Feel free to follow myself, Luke Alfano 11. Subscribe on Spotify, YouTube. It genuinely helps this reach more people who are rebuilding, like everyone listening. Because the more likes, shares this podcast will get, the more people will see it. And that's the ultimate goal. The more people who feel comfortable navigating their grief, that's just absolutely amazing. So remember, you're not broken, you're just human. And you're doing way, way better than you think. Remember that. And I'll see you next week for episode 8 of Too Young to Grieve.